unless the U.S. can say that it has completely destroyed Houthi capacity, which is practically impossible, there will never be a point where the Houthi threat is not significant.
Now, the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas says it has delivered its response to a proposed ceasefire deal for Gaza that could lead to the release of more hostages. No details have been released, but the United States has said it still believes an agreement is possible. It comes after Houthi rebels in Yemen said they'd fired missiles at 2 more ships in the Red Sea, despite US and UK strikes intended to deter such attacks. A Houthi leader has warned that the group will further escalate attacks if the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza does not end. Well, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in the region, and after talks in Qatar, he accused Iran of attempting to destabilize the Middle East.
There are those who want to move the region in a different direction and take a different path, and who are actively working to sabotage every effort to move toward lasting peace and security. Just look at what we've seen in the last couple of months and indeed in the last couple of weeks. Attacks in Syria and Iraq, attacks on Israel from Lebanon, attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea, attacks in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members, and of course, the attack on Israel on October 7th. Each and every one carried out by groups trained, armed, funded, informed by Iran.
Well, Gerald Michael Feierstein is a former US ambassador to Yemen under President Obama. He was also Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. Good evening to you, Gerald.
It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Good to have you with us. What do you make, first of all, of these renewed attacks by Houthi rebels on shipping in the Red Sea, despite the latest round of military strikes by the US and UK on Houthi targets?
Well, I think it's just a demonstration of how difficult, in fact, nearly impossible it is for the U.S. and its partners in the region to effectively change Houthi behavior. The Houthis have been confident. They underwent 7 years of air attacks by Saudi Arabia over the course of their civil war without being deterred, without being defeated or incapable of carrying on. They've been confident that they can continue to do that despite these US and UK air attacks. And so far, they've been correct.
So we've seen these defiant responses every time the US and UK have carried out these military strikes. I mean, isn't there a danger that these become just an endless round of reprisals and that they don't achieve their objective of stopping the attacks on shipping?
Absolutely. I think that's a real risk. And just to be clear, the administration, along with its partners, has used a number of different tactics to try to convince the Houthis to stand down on these attacks. They've used diplomacy, messaging, and communications. The administration announced that they were going to sanction the Houthi movement as a specially designated terrorist group. They have used all of the arrows in their quiver, if you will, to try to deter the Houthis. But the reality is that the Houthis have no incentive to really stop doing this, except if there is some kind of a ceasefire in Gaza.
And I'll come to that in just a moment. But just on that, I mean, the point is really that the Houthis surely only have to carry out relatively minor attacks, perhaps ineffectual ones, and they're still disrupting the shipping, aren't they? And that has quite significant consequences in terms of global shipping costs.
That's exactly right. And in fact, the irony is that the Houthis don't actually have to launch any missiles or drones at all. Just the threat of doing it and their demonstrated capacity to do it is sufficient to convince the shipping companies to avoid the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb and to take the longer route around the Cape of Good Hope and southern tip of Africa. So in fact, unless the U.S. can say that it has completely destroyed Houthi capacity, which is practically impossible, there will never be a point where the Houthi threat is not significant.
Was it a mistake then for Joe Biden, along with his British allies, to embark on this course?
I think that they desperately tried to avoid it. I think that they understood quite well what the difficulties were, what the challenges would be. The president was asked point blank by a reporter whether he believed that the U.S. action would stop the Houthi attacks, and he said no. I don't think we're under any illusion about the prospect of succeeding at this. I think that there is a political calculation here, as well as a sense that they needed to demonstrate in the region that they were going to respond to these attacks. But there was no real optimism that they were going to affect Houthi behavior.
The Houthis, of course, have made it clear that they believe that their action is in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Britain and the United States have been saying, look, this is just about the freedom of shipping, and have tried to deny that link. And we're hearing tonight that Hamas has delivered its response to some kind of proposed ceasefire deal. What do you read into what we're hearing on that?
Well, I think again, the Hamas has given a response. It's unclear. We've seen different assessments from the Qataris as well as from Washington about how close that comes to meeting the terms that were negotiated in Paris. But it does put the ball back into the Israeli court. They have not responded yet. Do they accept the terms that Hamas has agreed to, or do they not? And we've heard at least rumors that for Netanyahu and his government, there are issues there. There are aspects of the negotiated agreement that they would find very difficult to accept.
We've got the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on another round of diplomacy. He's been in Qatar, in Egypt, he's heading to Israel. But does the US still really have the sway that it once had over Israel? Benjamin Netanyahu seems so determined to press on with the military campaign in Gaza against Hamas at all costs, that it doesn't seem as though he's really heeding all those calls for restraint.
No, he's not. And I think that what we're seeing is the level of anger and frustration in Washington over Bibi Netanyahu's unwillingness to listen to the U.S., to accept U.S. concerns and red lines is rising. And we're seeing more and more, not only within the administration, but in Congress and among the American public, that people are beginning to wonder whether, in fact, the U.S. and Israel are on the same page any longer. And as the longer that this goes on, and the longer that we have the situation in Gaza that we're currently confronting, I think those levels of frustration are going to continue to rise until they reach a point where perhaps the administration will feel compelled to act.
And what would that look like? What would that mean?
Well, I think that that's part of the challenge that the administration faces is how to confront Israeli negativity without breaking the crockery, if you will. There are a number of ideas. There are proposals in Congress to connect the support for Israel, Israeli arms sales and assistance to their willingness to accept some of the U.S. constraints. There are other ideas out there about things that the administration might do that would get the Netanyahu government's attention.
Gerald Michael Feierstein, former US ambassador to Yemen. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.